I turned 50 the week the azaleas bloomed along Lincoln Drive. Each petal the color of a remembered blush. My name is Isabella Miller. And if you have already judged me by the smile I wear in old photographs, wide, lacquered, practiced then, I must begin with a confession. That smile is a chandelier in a house with a cracked foundation. It throws light everywhere, but on what matters, it dazzles until the ceiling trembles. The morning everything tilted, I was down on my knees on the driveway, scrubbing the last map of oil from beneath my husband's Buick. Luther had always believed a car was a man's second heart. I believed a marriage survived on small housekeeping, sponge and vinegar, countertop and calendar. So I polished his second heart as if the valves might squeak through negligence. I carried a little red caddy with my brushes, rags, and the lemon-scented spray that promised to erase fingerprints without erasing the hands that left them. There is nothing holy about cleaning, but there is something like prayer in the repetition. It's the way your mind drifts and returns, like a tide inventing the shoreline all day long. I hummed a hymn I hadn't sung since my mother's funeral and unwound the old floor mats, shook out the grit of 1,000 errands. Then slid my hand beneath the passenger seat where receipts and peppermint wrappers retreat to die. My knuckles touched something smooth and cold. The thing rolled against my fingers with the intimacy of a coin when I drew it out. I had to laugh first, a sharp little bark that startled a bird from the oak. The tube was silver with a powder blue label. It promised slickness. It spoke of warmth added by friction. It spoke, with its stupid pride, of pleasure that arrived without permission. The smile on my face then was not a chandelier. It was a blade I had been keeping in a drawer for years. And the feeling that rose behind it was not rage, not the hurricane people reserve for movies. It was smaller, a precision thing, the kind a jeweler needs to set a diamond, a calm, exacting, icy clarity. Luther had been distant. Busy was the word he selected each time, as if busyness were a respectable coat one wore in bad weather. He worked late at the parts warehouse, he oversaw inventory, he mentored the new boys who still smelled like campus and optimism. The warehouse, the boys, his responsibilities, they had replaced conversation. They had replaced the routine of wandering the block together after supper in our matching sneakers, pointing at windows, inventing biographies for everyone, whose light glowed like a small moon. A woman knows when the house is colder though the thermostat hasn't moved. A woman knows when a laugh lands in a room like a bird that cannot find purchase. And a woman, when she cleans, sees what the dust decided to settle upon, beneath our bed. A bobby pin the wrong shade of brown, on his shirts, a cologne that wasn't ours, and now this easy, slippery lie with its pharmacy voice. I placed the tube on the seat beside me. I looked at my hands, strong and square and freckled. I thought of myself at 26, carrying a bouquet the size of a satellite dish, vowing to build a home of afternoons and grace. I thought of the baby we didn't have, the crib we folded back into its carton, the sorrow we learned to stack with the holiday decorations in the attic. We had our rituals, we had habits that looked like love from far away. But a ritual that hides an absence is a trap. And the day the trap springs, you do not suddenly become vicious. You simply stop pretending the teeth aren't there. I did not say a word to Luther that night. We ate, we discussed the neighbor's new fence. He told me a story about a forklift and a boy named Cody that ended with a joke about the folly of youth. I laughed in all the right places and rinsed our plates and watched the lemon-scented suds gather, like a swarm of well-behaved bees around the silver. My reflection in the window was steady. The chandelier's smile undisturbed. The thing about quiet fury is that it is logistical. It assembles lists. It knows the hours of the hardware store, the weight of a lie, the route you walk when you need to feel steady again. I will not tell you the brand. I will not tell you the aisle. I will only say that some substances were not made for bodies and the world sells them anyway. And the world trusts us to know the difference. I knew the difference. I knew it like I knew a lemon from a sun, like I knew a promise from a permission slip. When I returned home, I packed groceries into the fridge. I kissed my own shoulder in the hallway mirror like a foolish girl. I sat on the edge of the tub and listened to the old house breathe. Then I took the silver tube I had found, turned it in my hands like a confession and slid it into the back of the linen closet. In its place, in his glove compartment, beneath that passenger seat well. The details do not matter to the narrative of a soul. What matters is the threshold. The moment you realize you have been rearranging yourself around a void and you decide quietly, like a locksmith, to change the shape of a key. People will say revenge is a fire that burns the one who lights it. Those people have never watched a woman sweep the ash from a hearth she did not ignite. I did not want to burn anything. I wanted only to see what truth looked like when it was forced to show itself. We were expected at Loretta's that Saturday. For a neighborhood cookout, Luther ironed his good shirt. The blue one that makes his eyes amusingly honest. He whistled a tune I couldn't place. I wore my red wrap dress and the gold hoops my sister mailed me from Houston the summer she forgot. Our mother's birthday. The sky had been scrubbed clean by morning rain and now it gleamed like a glazed bowl. Kids dragged their scooters up the cracked sidewalk. Someone's radio explored the golden oldies without shame. On the way, Luther kept patting his pocket. The way he pats for his wallet and phone, the quick inventory we all take. To ensure we remain ourselves. He winked at me at a red light. There were dimples once I adored. There were dimples I had learned to ignore. I thought of the tube and felt, not victory, not dread. A stillness I recognized from standing in a museum too long, staring at a painting that refuses to reveal its trick. Loretta's yard smelled like charcoal and cut grass. Fold-out tables sagged with potato salad and ambition. Our neighbor, Mr. Benton, the retired paramedic, told the same story about the mayor's dog he always tells when beer is cheap and the sun kindly. Luther drifted to the card table where the men dealt a fast game and kept an even faster accounting of each other's failures. I stood with the women, discussing tomatoes, the magistrate's divorce, the merits of the new pharmacy on 5th that delivers prescriptions by bicycle. People talk about marriage at parties the way they talk about weather in a drought too carefully. But Loretta, who has always owned the kind of frankness other people cannot purchase even with a pristine conscience, leaned close and whispered, "You look like you swallowed a clock and are listening to its tick." I smiled. I said I was fine. I said sometimes you cross a bridge you didn't realize you were walking on until you see the water below. The afternoon turned lazy. Heat accumulated in the shadows like folded blankets. When the laughter thinned out and the plates were greasy enough to shame, we began to gather our things. Luther vanished into Loretta's powder room. He had a habit of checking his reflection before re-entering the world, as if the world were a courtroom and he the lawyer who must appear perpetually reasonable. Time is a stubborn beast. It can be lulled into drowsiness by ritual, but then it will wake like a guard dog and bark at your ribs. When Luther did not return, I felt a bark inside my chest. A minute passed, two. The old clock on Loretta's mantel ticked with the righteousness of a judge. It was Mrs. Benton who heard it first, the strangled sound from the hallway, half gasp, half shout. Then a thump. Mr. Benton, all retired instincts exploding like flares, leapt to his feet. Loretta's son, Mal, who is large and gentle and always smells of detergent, reached the bathroom door first. He knocked. He called Luther's name. He tried the knob. It was locked. Luther believed in locked doors, in the dignity of privacy. "Move," Mr. Benton said. And in that moment he was all his uniforms at once. He shouldered the door. Wood protested, cracked, then surrendered with a sigh no one there will ever forget. The room beyond was too bright. The mirror caught us in duplicates. On the tile, Luther curled in an obedience the body usually reserves for prayer. Sweat glazed him. His face was the color of a failing bruise. His hands were moving without intelligence, pawing at his own center the way a swimmer reaches for a rung that isn't there. I could give you the words that were spoken then. I could list them the way a clerk lists damages. "Oh my God," and "call 911," and "what the hell," and "don't touch him," and "honey, breathe." But the truth is language falters in small rooms where shame has entered. It doesn't matter if the shame is earned. Shame sets up a table, invites everyone to sit, and eats before you do. I stood at the threshold with the towel Loretta pressed into my hands. I stood and watched the men become purposeful. Mr. Benton barked questions. How long did anyone hear him fall? Sir, can you tell me your name? The name he wanted was Luther. But the name that kept cartwheeling through my mind was Isabella. As if I had to rehearse my own self to remain upright, the ambulance arrived with a howl that transformed the neighborhood's gossip into silence. Neighbors gathered at their fences, faces arranged like a chorus that doesn't know which hymn to sing. Blue lights polished the leaves. The paramedics moved with that terrifying tenderness. All good professionals possess the kind that suggests they have seen the worst thing a body can do to itself and still promise you a kind of order. They asked questions we pretended not to hear. No one said the word on the powder blue label. No one spoke of substitutions, of aisles, of thresholds. We said accident because the mouth is a coward and loves the softness of that word. We said discomfort. We said reaction. And as they helped my husband to his feet, as they wrapped modesty around him with the grace of nurses and angels and mothers on the first day of school, I held the towel tighter and felt the jewelry of my choices cutting into my skin when they loaded him into the ambulance. A gull swooped low as if an ocean had been threaded down our street and only it knew how to read the tide. I climbed in after Luther because marriage is not a door you can decline to enter once again. Just because you finally noticed the hinges squeal. Mr. Benton shut the rear doors with a bang like a gavel. Loretta squeezed my arm and said, "I'll call you." The engine thrummed, the neighborhood pressed in, then slid away. I sat on the bench and watched the paramedics' hands move with humane efficiency, and I thought, absurdly, of the azaleas and how their blush is not shame but celebration, and how even a celebration can look garish against a house with a cracked foundation. My name is Isabella, and I am telling you this because there is a point in every story where the narrator must deglove her teeth and speak without ornaments. This is not that point. That point is coming, for now there is the ambulance, the thin cry of the siren, Luther's breathing like a violin with a broken string, the paramedics' questions, allergies, medications, and my answers, which I delivered like a woman trying to describe a landscape she has been painting her whole life. From one wrong photograph. We reached the hospital with a final lurch. Doors yawned open into the cold sincerity of the earth. Forms appeared, were filled, vanished. I gave Luther's date of birth as if reciting a spell that used to work but now only made smoke. They took him behind a curtain the color of guardedness. I was left with my hands, my wallet, the towel. Hospitals are collections of endings and beginnings disguised as fluorescent light. I sat, and the towel made a small mountain in my lap, and I watched people arrive with their private catastrophes. Folded into public calm, a boy with a swollen lip who still held his basketball like a devotion. A woman with a stack of bracelets who whispered into her phone in Spanish and wept precisely into the tissue so her mascara behaved. An old man asleep, mouth open, dreaming perhaps of a sweeter room. My phone vibrated, a hummingbird trapped in a pocket. "Loretta, are you okay? My sister, call me, Mr. Benton, he'll be all right, he's tough." I typed nothing, I held the towel. And I thought about what the word tough means when we apply it to men who lock doors and count inventory and tell jokes about forklifts. A nurse with kindness poured into her voice like cream approached with a clipboard and asked if I was Mrs. Miller. I nodded. She asked if there was anything they needed to know. I looked at the curtain. I looked at the towel. I said, "He has a sensitivity to adhesives." It was the safest truth I could stitch together without breaking open the consequences of the one I had forged. The nurse nodded as if I had confessed a reasonable preference, like disliking walnuts in brownies. "We'll take good care of him," she said. "You did the right thing bringing him in." I did not bring him in, the neighbors called. The neighbors saw what I had arranged and chose decency over spectacle. I felt a small, bitter gratitude that I did not deserve and could not refuse. When the doctor finally came, his face wore the grave neutrality of someone who delivers more news than he receives. He said words that sounded like weather reports: irritation, reaction, debridement. "Observation," he said. "He'll be uncomfortable for a while, but we have ways to help." He did not ask me why my eyes were so bright and dry at once. I signed a form. I waited again. Eventually, a resident named Claire with a braid that touched her waist let me stand at the end of the bed while Luther lay very still and stared at the ceiling. As if the ceiling contained the solution to a puzzle that had humiliated him, he did not look at me. I did not say his name. Between us, the curtain moved in the air conditioning like a throat learning how to swallow. And this, I think, is where a life begins to flake, like paint showing the undercolors. If you lean your ear close, you can hear the old house speak, the vows under the vows. The secret rooms, the stair no one ever used because it creaked like confession. That night I walked home alone. The moon was the color of a Band-Aid, the azaleas along Lincoln Drive slept like women who have finally stopped rehearsing apologies. On the front step I sat with the towel and listened to the cooling hum of the neighborhood, to the knowledge that something had ended in the bright square of Loretta's hallway and something else darker, stranger, more honest had begun. When I woke the next morning, the house was a museum where the docent had lost her voice. Every object contained a little plaque only I could read. The coffee maker, given on our 5th anniversary when we still believed caffeine could make up for sleep lost, to laughter, the photograph on the bookshelf, to people with sunburns, open mouths, and a horizon behind them that, in the lie of photographs, suggests futures are as simple as straight lines. The towel on the counter, a flag I had carried through the quietest war. I brewed the coffee and it tasted like a compromise, finally refusing to be charming. I carried a mug to the porch, sat where sun crawled up the railing like a soft animal, and listened to the neighborhood decide how to talk about us. A screen door 3 houses down clapped. A bicycle bell said it was time for joy. Somewhere a dog negotiated with the morning in a serious tone. My phone twitched and I left it where it lay, face down, because for once I did not want to be instructed by either sympathy or outrage. I wanted the ordinary world to hold me by the shoulders and say, "This is a day, Isabella, do with it what you must." Stop when it rang and rang again. I answered out of habit. "He's stable," said a nurse whose voice was stronger than her sleep. "He's asking for you." I almost asked which me, the chandelier or the blade. Instead I took my keys, the towel. By then I did not know how to leave a room without it, and went. At the hospital, Luther lay behind another curtain, the shade of green that makes a body look borrowed. The nurses had done what competence can do. They had cleaned the immediate harm and wrapped the area with the precision of caretakers who understand that dignity, like pain, is a physiological fact. He turned his head when I entered, and for a minute both of us were 26 again, inspecting the idea of each other with a sweetness that did not yet know what it would be asked to survive. "Izzy," he said, his voice sanded down to the practical. "I'm sorry you had to see." He stopped. There was no tasteful ending to that sentence. I put a chair where I could land if I needed to. "How are you feeling?" "Like a lesson," he said, then grimaced. "Like a lecture, actually. The kind the universe gives when you've ignored the syllabus." The joke arrived out of old habit and fell between us with a clatter. We were both too tired to pick it up. A doctor appeared, mid-size, meticulous eyes that had weathered many kinds of stubborn, and explained again what had happened, but as if narrating it to a jury. "We'll want to keep you another day for observation," he concluded. And that word was suddenly everything, observation. As if we were finally admitting this marriage into the lab, placing it beneath bright light, agreeing to look at it without perfume. After he left, Luther closed his eyes, opened them, and let the ceiling speak first. "I made mistakes," he said, "but last night wasn't the mistake I meant to make." "What mistake did you mean to make?" I asked, and my voice was paper thin but not yet burning. He chewed on his lower lip like a proly deciding whether to mention the contraband. "I've been lonely, Izzy." That's the dumbest confession a man can make when he's got a wife who keeps the house upright and the calendar honest. But there it is. He looked at me then, and there was the exhaustion of somebody who has been performing the role of himself too long and is ready to audition for silence. After the warehouse, the noise continues in your head. The boys, the deliveries, the forklifts like prehistoric beasts. I come home to quiet, and sometimes it's a feast and sometimes it's a theater with the lights on and no actors. "I'm in that theater," I said. He nodded as if I'd handed him evidence that only confirmed what he wanted to believe. "You are." You always have been, but I don't know how to talk to you about the empty seats we never filled. He meant the crib folded into the carton. He meant the holidays with too much napkin. Too much television, not enough argument. With this one sentence, he had set the whole orchestra pit on fire. And so, I said carefully, you found comfort. In a pharmacy aisle, my tone was arctic, my mouth, somehow, kind. I found an option, he said, shrugging weakly, and I may have been careless with where I put it. I never meant to. He lifted a hand toward the bandage, let it fall. Some apologies cannot be phrased in the active voice without damaging the room. Because I have lived a long time and learned to read the subtitles beneath what people say, I understood to facts at once that he was responsible for the distance that let him slip into private foolishness, and that I had collaborated with that distance by transforming our routines into a god I worshipped. Because it demanded only competence, I had cleaned, I had scheduled, I had smiled a chandelier's smile. I had not asked him to sit in the mess with me when we needed to, which is another way of saying I had not asked him to confess his loneliness. Before it learned the language of aisles, we spoke around and around it. Like bees who have discovered the hive has a new geometry. When a nurse came with breakfast, we paused like schoolchildren and then resumed, softer now. The words not yet becoming forgiveness, but at least not sharpening themselves further. Before I left, I touched his shoulder the way a hand meets a familiar. Shoulder can be a treaty or a map or a question. Mine was a question. I'll be home tomorrow. He said, I know. I said, so will I. On the sidewalk, the sun had strengthened its arguments. Outside the entrance, a woman smoked like a person in a photograph from the 1970s. Men, she said to the air, blunt and general and true. I smiled at the prophecy she didn't know she'd delivered, and kept walking until I found the bus bench where shadows rehearsed being useful. Loretta texted that she had dropped off soup. Mr. Benton wanted to know if he should mow our lawn as a therapeutic favor. My sister sent a link to a church podcast about forgiveness with a heart that glowed like a warning. I turned off the phone and watched a city bus carry a set of strangers east into their particular afternoons. It occurred to me then that my life had become very narrow, like a hallway lit by a string of nightlights. You can live safely in that glow forever if you accept stubbing your toe on the same truth every night, but I had seen bright, terrible hospital white. I had watched men shoulder down a door. I had heard the word observation and felt, for the first time in years, the appetite to be seen. I called a therapist whose number I'd been saving under Plumber for no reason other than I had not been brave. Her receptionist asked the right questions with the urgency of someone who understands that courage expires, if not immediately honored. I said my name. I said I was 50. I said I wanted to talk about a marriage that may not be broken but is certainly out of warranty. She offered me Tuesday afternoon. I took it like a person takes a life raft, not because she intends to drown, but because she intends to swim for a while without pretending she enjoys the current. At home, the soup waited on the step, warm under its quilt of foil inside. The house had not changed its mind about being a museum. I carried the towel to the laundry room, finally, and let it go. The machine accepted it without commentary and began the hum of absolutions that never reach the soul but are useful for shirts. On our kitchen table, the flower vase was empty. I cut azaleas from the bush and arranged them with the self-consciousness of a novice hostess. Setting places for angels, the neighbors began their small pilgrimages in the afternoon. Loretta first, with a casserole and satire, then Mal with a stack of funny DVDs as if laughter could be administered like antibiotics, then Mr. Benton, who stood on the porch and gave a short lecture about privacy and the menace of doors that lock from the inside. Each of them carried the crisis like a casserole, hot, heavy, meant to be shared, and each left a little lighter, which is the peculiar arithmetic of communal concern. That evening I sat with a notebook and wrote not a list but a letter I did not intend to send. Dear Luther, I began, then crossed out the dear as if it were a lie. Luther, I wrote, there is a road we have been walking beside all along and somehow never noticed. It's not paved. It doesn't promise better scenery. It promises only that if we walk it we have to look at our feet and sometimes at each other. and admit when the stones are sharp. Then, before I could become sentimental, I stood and made the bed with fresh sheets. A gesture that has always felt to me like issuing an invitation to sleep without dreams. He came home the next day the way men come home from humiliations, carrying paperwork, smelling faintly of antiseptic, wearing gratitude as if it were a poorly fitted jacket. I had not decided how to look at him. I had a portfolio of expressions: chandelier, blade, clerk, blank mirror, and I kept them in my pocket, like passports at a border crossing. "Hi," he said. "Hi," I said, and we were actors Mayer's hire for ribbon cuttings, competent, polite. Aware of the cameras, we avoided Loretta's house like a landmark from a darker map. We moved around each other with the courtesy of diplomats, and it would have continued like that, days stacked like thin pancakes. Marriage syruped into swallowable if not for the doorbell in the middle of that small evening. Mr. Benton again with his seriousness. But this time he carried a little cardboard box and a look so official I almost saluted. "I believe this is yours," he said, presenting the box as judges present sentences. "Found it under my privet hedge," my wife said. "Leave it be." But my conscience said, "Deliver the evidence." He winked to soften the blow he thought he was delivering. "We're neighbors," he added, offering me the ancient defense of the meddler. Inside the box sat the silver tube I had hidden and then misplaced. The one I had meant to keep as proof to myself that I had not dreamed any of it. My breath did a complicated dance, then made up its mind to continue. I took the box, the universe having perfected the timing of props. "Thank you," I said. After he left, Luther stared at the object, his eyes performing a theater of meanings. "You kept it," he said, and in his voice I could hear both accusations. That I was cruel, that I was thorough. "I tried to throw it away," I said, "but it seems the neighborhood believes in returns." We sat with the little silver weather system between us. Finally he said, with a gentleness I recognized from the early years when we were first married, "You used to keep every receipt in a showbox under the bed. You said if we ever got audited by hardship, you wanted proof we had honestly attempted our life." He reached across the table and laid two fingers on the edge of the box. "Isabella, I don't want to be audited by you. I want to be understood. Those are not exclusive categories," I said. And then I did the strangest thing I had done in months. I laughed. It cracked something in the ceiling of our kitchen I hadn't noticed was there. The laugh was not mean, it was astonished at my own aliveness. "I've made us both smaller than we needed to be," I added. "I made our love into a housekeeping project. You made your body into a secret. We are not tidy people, Luther. We are not a showroom." He nodded so vigorously. His jacket winced. "Then what are we? We're a house, and the foundation is cracked. Can it be fixed?" he asked, and there he was. The man who believes in bolts and socket wrenches and the possibility of repair. If a person will only lie under the thing and listen to its language. "I have an appointment Tuesday," I said, "with someone who helps people speak. You can come or not. This is not an ultimatum. It's an open door." "I've been wary of open doors lately," he said, smiling from the side of his mouth like a boy who has finally been caught and is relieved. "But yes, I'll come. I'm tired of playing attorney for my own heart." That night we slept like people expecting weather. The first session was ordinary in the way first confessions are: names, dates, a map drawn with a blunt pencil. The therapist, Dr. Sloan, whose eyes were the color of rivers that Hydrox, asked us to describe the best day of our marriage without mentioning a single object. We fumbled and then found it. The day we took the wrong road to the beach, got lost among farm stands, bought peaches so ripe they bruised at a whisper, and finally reached the ocean at dusk, when it had run out of theater and was practicing sincerity. "Good," she said. "That was a day you were alive together rather than managing together." For weeks we practiced this little difference. We left the lists on the fridge and walked the block again, inventing biographies for windows. Sometimes he reached for my hand and I let the memory of all the receipts and boxes and doors choose silence instead of law. Sometimes I reached for his and felt the bandage he still wore under his clothes. Like a stubborn footnote, healing is a bureaucrat. It demands forms be resubmitted, progress logged, patience rationed. Gossip, like climate, settled into its usual patterns, the neighborhood remembered other emergencies. Loretta moved on to a new fence debate. Mr. Benton stood on his lawn and delivered a lecture on sprinkler heads to a toddler who absorbed it as sacred lore. The ambulance siren that had once braided itself into our name untied, thread by slow thread. One Sunday, near evening, I took the azaleas in my hands and pruned them with respect, as if apologizing for all the metaphors I'd forced upon them. Luther came outside and watched me, his face softer than it had any right to be. "Want to drive?" he asked in a voice that was nearly shy. To where the road decides. We drove without destination. The radio found songs even it had forgotten. At a red light he said, "There's a new hire at the warehouse. She's 19. Yesterday she told me she didn't know people still married for life. She said all the married folks she knew were just waiting for their turn to be single again." I told her I didn't have advice, but that sometimes you get to 50 and realize you've spent 20 years waiting for a life you were already living. "What did she say?" "She said that sounded sad." He grinned, "and wise," which is how kids describe anything they don't want to feel yet. We crossed the railroad tracks just as a train arrived, long and officious and full of other people's goods. We waited, and in the waiting there was no urgency to fill the silence. When the last car passed and the red lights ceased their sermon, he drove on. We found the river. We parked in the lot where teenagers practice loving each other the way movies taught them to. We walked to the railing and leaned. "I'm still angry," I said. "Because honesty is not an endpoint, it's a practice." "So am I," he said, surprising me. "At myself, mostly. And a little at the world for selling solutions that are really just louder problems." We stood until dark and then darker. In the shadow our hands found each other like people find their way in a museum when the lights go down and something unfinished reveals itself. We were not fixed, we were not broken. We were not yet what we had promised and no longer what we had endured. We were two complicated mammals standing beside a moving body of water, deciding without fanfare to keep learning the language of observation. I will not presume to teach you how to forgive or punish. I can only tell you what we did next. We returned the silver tube to the pharmacy in a plain bag with no note. We told Dr. Sloan about our worst thoughts and our laziest kindnesses. We invited people into our house not because we were healed, but because we were tired of being our own only witnesses. I went back to choir where the altos hold the roof up. With the dignity of scaffolding, Luther asked the warehouse to move him 2 mornings, and he came home smelling less like prehistoric beasts and more like the possibility of an afternoon. If I had to summarize the months that followed, I would say we stopped pretending our life was a showroom and started living in our house. We argued like humans who could survive an unscheduled hour. We kissed like people who know a body is both a machine and a story. We took the long way to the beach and sometimes arrived at dusk, when the ocean is done with its theater and is busy being the ocean. I am 51 now. The azaleas bloomed again without asking our permission. Yesterday the doorbell rang and it was the 19-year-old from the warehouse, selling raffle tickets for her sister's softball team. She looked at us with that tender skepticism reserved for institutions that refuse to collapse. "Y'all seem happy," she said, "like it might be a trick." "We're observant," I said, "and we're here." She shrugged. "That works too." When she left, Luther raised his eyebrows. "Observant? It's my favorite word," I said. "It's the opposite of pretending." It is dusk as I write this, and the chandelier in the dining room glows because I finally changed the bulb that had flickered for a year. It makes the table look like we are about to host the future. My smile is not a chandelier anymore. It is a window with the blinds up. It lets in what is, even when that is unflattering. And behind it the foundation remains cracked. But we have learned the art of living in a beautifully imperfect house. Rugs where the floors are cold, paint where the weather scuffs us, hands where the railings wobble. My name is Isabella Miller. I am not the hero of a cautionary tale. I am a woman who once mistook tidiness for love, who made a reckless, quiet choice, who stood in a hallway while men broke down a door, who learned how to sit in the mess without burning the house down. If you pass by our porch and see the azaleas, You may think they are a metaphor. They're not. They're just flowers doing what flowers do, bloom even after storms. Because blooming is their only honest option. By the time spring folded into another summer, the sharp edges of that night in Loretta's hallway had dulled. Luther and I never pretended it hadn't happened. Instead, we let it sit between us like a scar, sometimes visible, sometimes not, but always part of the body. Therapy gave us language we hadn't owned before. We learned that silence is not the same as peace, and that routine can be both comfort and cage. We fought, we forgave in fragments. We practiced being alive together instead of just managing side by side. The neighbors moved on to new gossip. The ambulance siren became just another memory. And the silver tube, once a symbol of everything we weren't saying, was gone. What remained was to people with a cracked foundation who finally admitted they still wanted to live in the same house. On my 51st birthday, Luther handed me a peach so ripe it nearly dissolved in my palm. To the wrong roads, he said. To getting lost, I laughed, juice running down my wrist. And for the first time in years, my smile wasn't a chandelier or a blade, it was simply mine. My name is Isabella Miller. I am 51, and my story is not about revenge or punishment. It's about choosing to stay awake in a life that tried to lull us to sleep. It's about walking the long way to the ocean, arriving at dusk, and finding that even cracked foundations can hold if both people keep building. And so I stay. Not because it's easy, but because this imperfect house is still ours. The end.